Ezekiel the parrot soared through the blue skies above Jerusalem, his feathers gleaming like a rainbow in flight. He loved to fly high where the wind was strong and the view stretched far and wide. That morning, as he glided above a quiet hill, he noticed a small group gathered below. At the center stood someone familiar: Jesus. Ezekiel tilted his wings and circled lower. What was happening down there? He perched on a fig tree branch nearby, peering down with curious eyes. Jesus stood among his disciples, speaking gently but with great purpose. Ezekiel cocked his head. He had heard Jesus speak before, by lakes, in villages, and among crowds. But this moment felt different. It was calm, focused, full of love. Ezekiel repeated softly, "Wait for the gift, wait for the gift." Jesus said, "John baptized with water, but in a few days you will be baptized with the Holy Spirit." The disciples looked at each other, confused. One asked, "Lord, are you going to restore the kingdom to Israel now?" Jesus smiled and shook his head. "It's not for you to know the times," he said, "but you will receive power, and you will be my witnesses to the ends of the earth." Ezekiel blinked. "Witnesses," he squawked. "Power. To the ends of the earth." He fluffed his wings with excitement. He wasn't sure what all of it meant, but it sounded important, huge, even. The disciples were listening closely, their eyes locked on Jesus. Something big was coming. Ezekiel could feel it. Then, as Jesus finished speaking, something extraordinary happened. His feet lifted from the ground. Gently, slowly, he rose into the air. Up, up, past the heads of the disciples. Ezekiel squawked in shock. "He's flying, flying like me." But Jesus wasn't flapping. It was like the sky itself was carrying him upward. The disciples watched in wonder. Ezekiel leaped from his branch and followed, wings beating hard. But Jesus kept rising, higher and higher, until a bright cloud wrapped around him like a curtain. And then, he was gone. Ezekiel hovered, blinking. "Where did he go?" he cried. "Where's Jesus?" Below, the disciples were still staring at the sky, their mouths hung open, their eyes wide with amazement. Suddenly, two men in glowing white clothes appeared beside them. "Why do you stand looking into the sky?" they asked. "Jesus has been taken into heaven, but he will return the same way you saw him go." Ezekiel swooped down and landed on a rock beside the group. "He's coming back," he chirped. The disciples began to smile, though they couldn't see Jesus anymore. They remembered his words. They felt peace. He hadn't left them forever. He had promised to be with them always. As the group turned to head back toward Jerusalem, Ezekiel flapped his wings and followed. He didn't know what would happen next. But one thing was sure: Jesus was alive. And even if Ezekiel couldn't see him, he could still trust him. That thought made Ezekiel sing as he soared above the road. "He's coming back, coming back." Back in the city, the disciples gathered in an upstairs room. They prayed together, remembering all Jesus had said. Ezekiel sat on the windowsill, preening his feathers and listening closely. The room wasn't fancy. There were no crowds or trumpets. But there was something special. Peace. Ezekiel whispered to himself. "He's still with us." still with us. The days passed quietly. Ezekiel flew from tree to rooftop, checking in on the disciples. They were waiting, just like Jesus had told them. Some days they talked. Some days they prayed. Ezekiel liked to perch nearby, chirping along. He didn't understand everything, but he knew this. Something wonderful was coming. One morning, a breeze swept through the city. The sky was clear, but the air felt different. Ezekiel soared above the rooftops and noticed something strange. A sound, like rushing wind. It wasn't coming from outside, but from the very room where the disciples waited. Wind indoors. Ezekiel squawked. That's new. He darted to the window and peeked inside. What he saw made his feathers stand on end. Tiny flames appeared above each person's head, not burning them, just resting like golden crowns. And the disciples began to speak words from many languages, words Ezekiel had never heard before. It was as if their voices were lit with fire. Crowds gathered outside the house, pointing and whispering. How are they speaking our languages? Some asked. Aren't they from Galilee? Others laughed and shook their heads. But Ezekiel wasn't laughing. He could feel it. This was the gift Jesus had promised. This was the Holy Spirit. Peter stood up and raised his voice. He told the crowd about Jesus, his life, his death, his resurrection, and how he had gone back to heaven. Ezekiel flew circles above the crowd, calling out, "He's alive! He's alive!" The people listened closely. Many felt their hearts change. They believed. By the end of the day, 3,000 people had been baptized. They joined the disciples, forming the very first church. Ezekiel couldn't believe it. So many. He chirped. He perched on the temple roof, looking over the joyful crowd. The sky was clear, but the Spirit was moving like wind through the trees. In the days that followed, Ezekiel watched as the new believers shared food, prayed together, and helped one another. They sang songs in the courtyards and told stories about Jesus in the marketplaces. Ezekiel fluttered from place to place, soaking it all in. The world was changing, and it had all started with Jesus' words on that hill. Sometimes, Ezekiel returned to the place where Jesus had ascended. He'd perch on the same fig tree and look up at the clouds. He couldn't see Jesus, but he remembered. And he knew Jesus hadn't gone far. He had left his spirit, his truth, and his mission. Ezekiel chirped softly. With us. Always with us. One evening, as stars blinked over Jerusalem, Ezekiel found a quiet branch and tucked his head beneath his wing. He remembered the sky surprise, the shining cloud, and the promise of return, and he whispered one last word into the breeze before sleep came. Soon. Ezekiel learned that even when we can't see Jesus, he is still with us. He gave us his Spirit to guide, comfort, and help us share his love with the world. Key verse. He was taken up before their very eyes, and a cloud hid him from their sight. Acts chapter 1, 9. NIV. As time passed, Ezekiel flew to new towns and villages, following the disciples as they shared Jesus' story. He watched as people were healed, prayers were answered, and hearts were changed. even though he couldn't see Jesus anymore. Ezekiel saw signs of him everywhere. In the love, the joy, and the truth that filled each place. One day, Ezekiel perched on a quiet hillside and looked up at the sky. The clouds drifted slowly, just like the day Jesus rose. He closed his eyes and whispered the words he'd heard so long ago. "You will be my witnesses to the ends of the earth." Ezekiel smiled. The mission hadn't ended. It had only just begun. Ezekiel learned that even when we can't see Jesus, he is still with us. He gave us his spirit to guide, comfort, and help us share his love with the world. Key verse. He was taken up before their very eyes, and a cloud hid him from their sight. Acts chapter 1, 9. NIV.